Have you ever been lying in a hospital bed, waiting for emergency surgery, terrified that you might not wake up, and the only thing you ask your parents is to watch your kids, only to be told they're too busy going to a concert? My name is Elliot Grayson. I'm 33 years old, a single dad living in Austin, Texas. 4 years ago, my wife passed away unexpectedly, leaving me to raise our twins alone. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but through all of it, one thing never changed. I kept sending $3,200 every month to my parents. Even when I was drowning in funeral expenses, even when I was cutting costs to provide for my kids, my parents still expected their money. And then, last Christmas Eve, I ended up in the ER with a ruptured appendix. The doctors told me I needed emergency surgery ASAP. I was scared, not for myself, but for my kids. They had already lost their mother. What if something happened to me? So, I did the only thing I could. I called my parents and asked them to come watch the twins. Their response: "Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans. We've had these Rolling Stones tickets for months. We're retired, Elliot. We deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems." And that's when it hit me. I was never really their son. I was just their personal ATM. This is a real story from r/True Off My Chest, a subreddit where people share their most painful truths. And this is Elliot's story. If you enjoy real-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Reddit True Vault. I always thought that when it truly mattered, when I was at my lowest, my parents would be there for me. That was the one comforting thought I clung to whenever things got overwhelming. But Christmas Eve proved me wrong. I had been feeling sick for days, pushing through the pain because, as a single dad of 2 toddlers, there was no time to be sick. No time to slow down, no one to pick up the slack. It started as dull discomfort in my abdomen, but by the time Christmas Eve rolled around, it was agony, a burning, relentless pain that had me breaking out in a cold sweat. Still, I ignored it, until I collapsed while trying to make my kids dinner. I barely remember the ambulance ride. Just flashing lights, a paramedic asking me questions I could barely answer, my son Alex clutching my hand with wide, terrified eyes. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed with a doctor standing over me, explaining in a calm but urgent voice that my appendix had ruptured. The infection had already spread, and they needed to operate immediately. If they didn't, there was a very real chance I wouldn't make it. And that's when I realized I had a bigger problem. Who would take care of my kids? Their mother was gone. My support system was non-existent. And the only people I could turn to were the same ones I had been sending $3,200 to every month for the last 4 years. My parents. I called them, still groggy from the painkillers, trying to explain the situation. I told them I was being prepped for emergency surgery, that I didn't know how long I'd be under, and that I needed someone to watch Alex and Amelia. I expected concern, maybe even panic. What I got instead was irritation. Through the phone, I could hear music, background chatter, the sound of glasses clinking. They were celebrating, enjoying themselves. My mom sighed heavily, as if I had just asked for something completely unreasonable. She reminded me that they had Rolling Stones tickets that had been purchased months ago. There was no way they could cancel now. My dad chimed in, his voice clipped, saying that they were retired and that I had no right to keep dragging them into my problems. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, feeling the kind of betrayal that sucks the air from your lungs. These were the people I had been financially supporting for years. The people whose mortgage I paid, whose bills I covered. The people who, after my wife died, continued to expect their monthly allowance while I drowned in grief and funeral costs. And now, when I was staring down major surgery, they couldn't be bothered to miss a concert. The call ended. I don't even remember how. Maybe I hung up. Maybe they did. I do remember the way Alex looked up at me, his little face full of confusion. He had heard the conversation, or at least enough to know something was wrong. He asked if Grandma was mad at me. I turned away before he could see the look on my face. At some point, a nurse named Mark must have overheard because he walked over, checking my vitals and asking quietly if I needed help with childcare. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. A minute later, he was making a phone call, telling me he had a cousin who ran a professional childcare service that specialized in emergency cases. She was already on her way. A stranger had just shown me more kindness than my own flesh and blood, and something inside me snapped. For years, I had been the one who never said no. The one who picked up the slack, who provided, who never complained. The one who sent money, month after month, even when I could barely afford to breathe. But lying in that hospital bed, with an 4 in my arm and the reality of my situation sinking in, I made a decision. I picked up my phone. The first message I sent was to my bank. Cancel all future transfers to my parents. The second was to my parents themselves. I told them I was done, that I would no longer be providing financial support, that my children and I deserved better than being treated like an afterthought, and that they should never contact me again. I hit send, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The doctor returned, explaining that the infection had already started spreading. The surgery needed to happen immediately. I barely had time to process the fear that came with that realization. The fear that my kids could wake up tomorrow as orphans before they were wheeling me into the OR. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took hold was Alex's tiny hand squeezing mine. He told me to be brave. Then, darkness. When I woke up, I was in pain. My throat was dry. My stomach felt like it had been torn apart. Because, in a way, it had. The surgery had taken 4 hours, longer than expected. The infection was worse than they initially thought. The doctor told me later that if I had waited another day, I might not have made it, but I had survived, and that's when I noticed my phone flashing on the bedside table. 31 missed calls, 47 text messages, 16 voicemails. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they had realized their mistake. Maybe they had panicked when they realized their son had been in major surgery. Maybe they actually cared. But when I opened the messages, the reality hit me like a truck. Not a single one asked if I was okay. Not one asked about the kids. Instead, they were freaking out about their mortgage, about how I had cut them off without warning, about how they had already planned a non-refundable cruise and now couldn't afford to go. I scrolled through their texts, each one making my stomach turn. They weren't worried about me. They weren't worried about my kids. They were worried about their lifestyle. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relief. Lying in that hospital bed, still weak from surgery, I kept replaying everything in my head. The way my parents dismissed me when I begged for their help. The way they acted like I was an obligation rather than their son. The way I had spent years sacrificing for them, sending them money, trying to be the responsible one, only to realize they never once saw me as anything more than a wallet. But the truth is, this moment, this betrayal, was just the final straw. It had always been this way. Ever since I was a kid, I had been treated as the backup plan, the reliable one, the one who could take care of himself, which, in their eyes, meant I never needed love, attention, or support. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Brandon, he was the golden child, the one who never had to struggle, the one who could do no wrong, the one my parents adored while I was left on the sidelines, wondering what it would feel like to be chosen. I remember being 10 years old, watching from the front porch as my dad set up a brand new bike for Brandon's birthday. A shiny red mountain bike, with gears and a suspension system that made it look like something out of a commercial. I had never gotten a bike that nice. Mine had been a second-hand one from a garage sale, with rust on the handlebars and a seat that wobbled no matter how much I tried to tighten it. When I asked why Brandon got a brand new one, my mom sighed like I was being difficult. Because he's younger. He needs more than you do. That was always the excuse. When Brandon turned 16, my parents surprised him with a car. A brand new, fresh out of the dealership, shiny black Jeep. No payments, no expectations, just his, completely paid for. I was 19 at the time, working 2 part-time jobs while balancing college classes, taking the bus to work because I couldn't afford a car. I asked my parents if they could help me out, not even to buy me a car, just to help with a down payment. Mom laughed. Elliot, you know we can't afford that. Why don't you take out a loan? And so I did. I spent months working extra shifts, saving every penny, and finally, bought a beat-up used Honda with over 100,000 miles on it. I paid for everything. My gas, my insurance, my maintenance. Meanwhile, Brandon wrecked his Jeep within a year, and my parents bought him another one. That's just how it was. When it came time for college, it was the same story. Brandon got tuition fully paid, lived in a fully furnished apartment that my parents covered, didn't work a single day while in school. Me, I had to hustle for scholarships, had to work 2 jobs to afford tuition, took out student loans that I was still paying off well into my 30s. And then, Brandon dropped out after 2 years, not because he couldn't handle it, but because he didn't feel like it. College isn't for everyone, Mom had said, rubbing his back like he was a wounded child. They never pressured him to go back, never expected him to do anything. Meanwhile, I was out there grinding, working 60-hour weeks, climbing my way up from an entry-level sales job to district manager at a national sporting goods company by the time I was 29. I built my own success, No handouts, no help, and somehow, despite all of that, they still expected me to support them, even when I got married, even when I had kids, even when my world fell apart. Losing Sarah was the hardest thing I had ever been through. She was my partner, my best friend, the person who saw me, not as an afterthought, not as an obligation, but as someone worth loving. She was the one who believed in me when no one else did. We met at a company event when I was 24. She worked in marketing, sharp as hell, funny in a way that caught me off guard. We started dating, got married 2 years later, bought a little townhouse together. When we had the twins, I felt like I had finally built something real. A family of my own. A life where I wasn't just a supporting character in someone else's story. And then, the accident. A drunk driver. A rainy night. A collision that shattered everything in an instant. 1 minute, she was there. The next, she was gone. And I was left alone, holding 2 babies who would never remember their mother. I can't even describe what that time in my life felt like. The numbness. The exhaustion. The way every single day felt like trying to breathe underwater. And yet, through all of it, I still sent my parents money. I was drowning in grief, in funeral costs, in hospital bills, and they still asked for their check every month. Not once did they ask if I was okay. Not once did they offer to help with the kids. I remember calling my mom 2 weeks after the funeral, voice shaking, telling her I didn't think I could afford to keep sending them money. She sighed. "I know this is hard for you, Elliot, but we rely on that money. You wouldn't want us to struggle, would you?" And like an idiot, I said okay. I kept paying their bills. I kept putting them first, because that's what they had trained me to do. Until now. Until I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from emergency surgery, realizing that my life meant nothing to them. Realizing that they had never once treated me like a son. I wasn't their child. I was just a resource, a financial plan. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself the question I should have asked years ago. Why the hell am I still taking care of parents who never took care of me? What do you think? Have you ever been the responsible one in your family, expected to sacrifice everything while others got a free pass? Let me know. There's a specific kind of anger that settles in your chest when you realize you've been played for years. It's not the loud, screaming kind. It's cold, calculated, resolute. Lying in that hospital bed, weak but painfully awake, I finally saw my parents for what they were, opportunists who never actually cared about me. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore, so I did something I'd never done before. I fought back. The first thing I did after getting discharged from the hospital, even before I could properly walk without wincing, was book a meeting with a lawyer. Her name was Claire Mitchell, and she came highly recommended. Mid-40s, sharp as hell, the kind of woman who could verbally rip a man apart in a courtroom and then go enjoy a latte afterward. I laid everything out for her. Every transaction I had sent my parents over the years, every bill I had covered, every dollar I had funneled into their mortgage, utilities, and general lifestyle. Claire skimmed through the numbers, eyebrows raising as she flipped through the bank statements. "You do realize you've essentially been funding their entire lives, right?" she asked. I exhaled sharply. "Yeah, and I'm done." I expected her to tell me there was nothing I could do, that since I had willingly sent the money, I had no legal ground to stand on. But instead, she tilted her head, tapping a manicured nail against my mortgage records. "Your name isn't on this house, correct?" I shook my head. "No, I've been paying their mortgage for 4 years, but they never put me on the deed." She smirked. "Then we have leverage." Turns out, because my financial support had been consistent and documented, I could legally demand reimbursement for those payments. And if they refused, I could file a lawsuit to force them to sell assets to cover the amount. In other words, they either paid me back or they risked losing everything. And I was more than willing to let them burn. That night, after putting my kids to bed, I sat down at my laptop and drafted 2 emails. The first one went to my bank, an immediate stop payment on all automatic transfers to my parents. The second one went to my parents themselves. Subject: regarding my financial contributions. Mom, Dad, effective immediately, I will no longer be providing you with financial support. Over the past 4 years, I have contributed a significant amount of money towards your mortgage, utilities, and other expenses. Given your treatment of me, I see no reason to continue doing so. I am also formally requesting reimbursement for the total amount I have contributed toward your mortgage. The sum is attached to this email, along with documentation. If I do not receive a response within 14 days, I will be pursuing legal action to recover my losses. This is not up for discussion. Do not contact me unless it is regarding the repayment. Elliot, I hit send. Then I sat back and waited for the explosion. The first response came within an hour. A missed call from Mom. Then another. And another. Then came the texts. Mom, what is this email? Mom, Elliot, this isn't funny. Call me now. Dad, are you out of your damn mind? You can't just cut us off like this. Oh, but I could. I ignored them. By the next morning, my voicemail was full. Their messages shifted as the day went on. First, it was pleading. Mom, sweetheart, please, let's talk. We're family. Mom, you're being emotional. Let's work this out. Then it became anger. Dad, you ungrateful little shit. After everything we've done for you? Dad, you wouldn't even have the life you do if it wasn't for us. Ah, yes. The classic guilt trip. Then, finally, they landed on manipulation. Mom, you're going to make us homeless. Is that what you want? For your parents to be on the streets? Mom, you have 2 houses, Elliot. Are you seriously going to watch us suffer? I stared at the messages, completely numb. Because here's the thing. They didn't say, we're sorry. They didn't say, we should have been better parents. They didn't even acknowledge what they had done. They only cared about losing my money. It confirmed everything I already knew. They never saw me as a son, just a paycheck. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from Claire, my lawyer. It was a formal demand for repayment, a bill. With every transaction I had made listed in black and white. Total amount, $152,000. And the best part? The letter was legally binding. If they ignored it, we would proceed with legal action, which could result in a forced sale of their home to cover the debt. I imagined my mom opening that letter. Imagine the moment she realized she was out of options. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt before when dealing with them. Power. For years, they had used me, taken from me, treated me like I was disposable. And now, I was the one holding all the cards. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? What was your breaking point? Let me know. There's a certain satisfaction in watching people reap what they sow, especially when those people never once thought their actions would come back to haunt them. For years, my parents lived like money would always magically appear in their accounts. Because, well, it did. I was their safety net, their fallback, their financial crutch, until I wasn't. And now, they were drowning. It took 3 months after I cut them off for the house of cards to collapse. Their mortgage, the one I had been covering, was now 3 months past due. And banks? They don't do guilt trips. They don't care about sob stories. They care about payments. When the official foreclosure notice arrived in their mailbox, my parents panicked. The same people who used to boast about their financial independence were now completely dependent on a son they had spent years neglecting. And now, they were out of options. With me out of the picture, they turned to Brandon, their golden child, the one who had never been asked to sacrifice, the one who had never seen their true nature. They fed him the usual lies, painting me as some kind of villain who was punishing them over some minor disagreement. Elliot is overreacting, honey. He's doing this to hurt us. We supported him for years, and this is how he repays us. And the best part? His surgery? Oh, it was nothing serious. He's just being dramatic. Brandon bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. At first, one evening, my phone buzzed. Brandon, I almost didn't answer. After everything, I expected more guilt tripping, more accusations, but something in me said, pick up. So I did. And for the first time in our entire lives, Brandon asked for my side of the story. Not our parents' version, not the twisted narrative they fed him. Mine. And I told him everything. I told him about the emergency surgery. I told him about how I had been moments away from sepsis, from dying. I told him about how I begged them to watch my kids, the same kids they claimed to love. And I told him how they chose a concert over me, over their own son. Brandon was silent for a long time. Then he said 2 words I never expected to hear from him. Send proof. I didn't hesitate. I sent him everything. My hospital records, screenshots of their texts, bank statements proving just how much I had supported them over the years. And then I waited. For what felt like forever, he didn't respond. But when he finally did, I knew something had changed. They lied to me. That night, Brandon showed up at their house. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't there to please them. He was there for answers. I wasn't there, but I can imagine how it went down. I can picture Mom's fake tears, Dad's defensive posturing. I can imagine them trying to twist the story again. We just wanted to protect you from the drama. Elliot was fine. He's exaggerating. We had to go to that concert. We spent so much on those tickets. But this time, Brandon wasn't buying it. And when he asked them the question that mattered most, they had nothing to say. Why didn't you just help him? He almost died. Silence. Guilty. Deafening. Silence. For the first time, Brandon saw them for who they really were. And he walked away. The next day, he showed up at my house with 2 suitcases. I'm done with them, he said. And just like that, they lost their last pawn. He told me everything. how they scrambled to justify their actions, how they tried to twist the truth even when backed into a corner. And he told me he was sorry for not seeing it sooner, for not believing me, for not being there. I told him it wasn't his fault, because when you grow up in a house built on manipulation, it's hard to see the cracks in the foundation. The final blow. With Brandon gone, my parents were truly alone. No son to fund their lifestyle, no son to manipulate. No one left to clean up their mess. And then, the medical bills arrived. Their reality finally hit them. They had spent years living beyond their means, assuming there would always be someone there to bail them out. And now, they had nothing, and no one. There's a certain irony in life. Some people call it karma. Others call it poetic justice. Me, I just call it consequences. Because after years of watching my parents burn through money, manipulate their own kids, and take everything for granted, the moment finally came. The moment where no one was left to save them, and they had to face the mess they created. The call I knew was coming. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished up a home workout, a routine I had started since my surgery, rebuilding my strength, rebuilding myself. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. And the moment I did, I heard her voice. "Elliot, it's your father. He's had a heart attack." I didn't react, not right away, because the thing about emotional detachment is that it doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, piece by piece, until one day, you wake up and realize that the people who once had power over you don't anymore. I took a deep breath, and she begs. I don't flinch. My mother was crying. For the first time in my life, she sounded desperate. "He needs emergency surgery. They won't operate without a deposit. $30,000. Please, Elliot, we don't have it." I closed my eyes, not out of pity, not out of grief, just out of sheer exhaustion. Because wasn't this predictable? They had spent years blowing through their money, assuming I would always be there to catch them when they fell. But now, I wasn't there anymore, and they were free falling. "What about your savings?" I asked. I already knew the answer. She sobbed harder. "Gone. Your investments? Gone. Your luxury watches? The golf trips? The fine dining? The cruises?" "Elliot, please," she choked. "He's your father." I give her the answer she deserves. I let out a breath. And then I said the coldest words I have ever spoken in my life. "Remember when I needed you?" The line went dead silent. Remember when I was lying in a hospital bed, barely able to move, with two scared little kids crying beside me? She didn't respond. And remember how I called you? Begging you to help. Begging you to watch your own grandchildren. And what did you say? I could hear her breath hitch. She knew what was coming. "Oh, that's right." I continued, my voice like ice. "You told me not to bother you. You had a concert to go to." Silence. I let it stretch. Let it sit heavy between us. "Well, Mom," I said finally, my voice calm, steady, and unforgiving. "I have my own plans now, and they don't include saving you." Then I hung up. The fallout. She called again, and again, and again. Each time, I let it ring. Then, I got a text. One single, desperate message. "He's going to die, Elliot. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." I stared at the screen, and for a moment, just a moment, I hesitated. Because yes, he was still my father. And once, a long time ago, before all the manipulation, neglect, and financial abuse, maybe he actually loved me. But love, real love, it doesn't come with conditions. And for my parents, their love had always been transactional. So no, I wasn't going to regret this. Not today, not ever. Brandon's final realization later that night. Brandon showed up at my door. His face was tired. "Hello, you were right," he muttered. "I already knew. They've been lying to me this whole time." I nodded. "They asked me for money too," he admitted, rubbing a hand over his face. "And when I said I didn't have it," Mom flipped. "Said I was a disappointment. That dad's life was on my conscience." I scoffed. Classic. He let out a breath. "I'm done, Elliot." His voice was quiet, firm. "I can't do this anymore." "Welcome to the club," I murmured. The inevitable in my father did end up getting his surgery. Not because of me, not because of Brandon, but because hospitals don't just let people die. They worked out a payment plan, and he survived. But the damage was done. They lost everything. The house, the boat, the status they had clung to for years. And for the first time in their lives, they had to live within their means. No more luxuries, no more control, and no more sons to manipulate. Do I feel sorry for them? Honestly, not really. Because if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's this. You don't get to demand loyalty from the people you've betrayed. And if they had to learn that the hard way, so be it. I'd love to say that cutting them off was the end of it, that I walked away, never looked back, and never questioned myself. But that's not how life works. Because no matter how much they had hurt me, they were still my parents. And despite everything, I still had a choice to make. Brandon had been staying with me for a few months now. At first, it was temporary. He needed space. needed time to process everything he had learned about our parents. But over time, it became clear Brandon was actually changing. He picked up extra shifts at work. He started reading about finances. He helped with the kids. And for the first time since Sarah passed, I wasn't alone. I came home from work one evening to find him helping Amelia with her homework at the kitchen table, his face scrunched in concentration. "Dude," he muttered, staring at her math book. "I swear they didn't teach this when we were kids." I chuckled, setting down my briefcase. "Nah, they did. You just didn't pay attention." Amelia giggled, her little face lighting up. "Uncle Brandon's not good at fractions," she whispered, like it was a big secret. Brandon gasped dramatically. "How dare you?" He clutched his chest. "I am amazing at fractions." She giggled louder, and for a moment, it felt like a real family, a normal family, a family built on trust and love, not manipulation and money. And that's when I realized Brandon wasn't like them. He never had been. He was just a product of them. And unlike our parents, he actually wanted to change. My parents, though, I wasn't so sure. After my dad's heart surgery, they had officially lost everything. The house was gone. Their savings? Gone. The friends they used to flaunt their wealth to? Also gone. They were desperate. And Brandon, against his better judgment, felt guilty. "Elliot, they have nowhere to go." "That's not my problem." "I know." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "But I don't know, man. I just keep thinking, if they really wanted to change, shouldn't we give them the chance?" I stared at him. "And what happens when they screw up again?" Brandon hesitated, because he knew they would. But he also wasn't ready to completely abandon them. And that's when I made a decision. One final offer. I still own my old townhouse. Brandon's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, seriously?" I nodded. "It's nothing fancy, but it's a roof over their heads." Brandon looked relieved, until I spoke again. "But there are rules." I sat our parents down at a coffee shop. They weren't welcome in my house. They looked tired, drained. For the first time in their lives, they didn't have leverage over me, and it showed. Brandon told us about the house. My mother started, her voice cautious. "It's not free," I said flatly. "This isn't a gift." She flinched. My father stayed silent. Good. For once, they were actually listening. I pulled out a contract, laid it on the table between us. "Here are the terms." They would pay rent. A modest amount, but still something. They would attend financial counseling. They would cut all unnecessary expenses. No more cruises, no more golf clubs, no more fine dining. They would not contact me or Brandon for money. Ever again. "You sign this," I said, watching them carefully, "or you find somewhere else to live." My mother looked betrayed. "You're making us sign a contract?" "Damn right I am." Her lips trembled. "But we're family." I smiled. "Then you should have acted like it." They signed, because they had no choice. And for the next few months, they actually stuck to it. They lived modestly. They attended counseling. They even sent small gifts for the kids. Nothing extravagant, just simple things. Brandon visited them occasionally. Me? I kept my distance. Because here's the thing. I didn't care if they changed. I didn't care if they became better people. What mattered was that I had changed. That I was finally free. Free from their expectations. Free from their control. Free to finally live my own damn life. The last time I saw my mother, it was raining. She stood on the porch of the townhouse, watching as I dropped Brandon off. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw it. Not regret, not love, just recognition. She finally understood that I wasn't her son to manipulate anymore. I wasn't coming back. I turned away, heading back to my car. And as I pulled out of the driveway, I whispered the last thing I'd ever say about them. "I hope you've learned." I stood outside on the porch, a cup of coffee in my hands, watching my kids play in the yard. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. Brandon was with them, lifting Amelia onto his shoulders while Alex chased them, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. It was a simple moment, but for me, it was everything. For the first time in my life, I felt free. No more guilt, no more obligations, no more being used. My parents were no longer a weight on my shoulders, and I had finally built something real, something stable, for my kids, for myself. And as I watched them play, I realized something. Family isn't about blood. It's about who stands by you, who respects you, who chooses you. And that was something my parents never did. But my brother did, and my kids always would. So maybe, just maybe, I didn't lose a family. I just finally built the right one. This story is a reminder that sometimes family isn't defined by blood, but by love and respect. And walking away from toxicity, that's not weakness. That's survival. If you love real-life stories that hit deep, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Reddit True Vault.